This happened to me about 2.5 years ago. It happened before seeing anything about the black-eyed kids online. In fact, this particular incident prompted me to search online about them. I lived in a house by a lake in an older neighborhood up near Toronto, Canada. I'm not super into the paranormal or anything, but I sometimes get weird feelings when I go places. Anyways, when I first lived in the house, I never got a bad vibe from it. About a year after living there, I did wake up one night and saw a man with a top hat standing in my bedroom doorway, but he quickly disappeared in a blink of an eye. No bad vibe there at all, just thought I was half asleep still seeing things or dreaming. However, my husband, who doesn't believe in this stuff at all, woke up a few nights later and actually saw a kid standing in the doorway, holding a sign with numbers written on it for a brief second. After that is when things got a bit more creepy. I started getting bad vibes when going upstairs, especially in my infant son's room, and at the back of the house. Sometimes at night I would feel creeped out by the back door when my dog wouldn't want to go outside for his last pee of the evening. I just pegged it as my own imagination running away with me. One evening, I had just put my son down for bed. I glanced over at the monitor and it was off, and the battery was dead, which I found odd because I always leave it plugged in. So when I plugged it back in and turned it back on, there on the screen was a boy, maybe 6 years old, with black eyes and black hair. It was for only half a second when the screen turned back off. I kid you not, my heart stopped and I had a mini panic attack. I had my husband check on our son and he was fine. After that, I never got any more creepy vibes from the house, but our baby monitor never worked correctly. It would always disconnect and I just kept it off from then on. Also, if you're wondering, it's not one of those monitors that can be hacked into on a separate Wi-Fi line. It was a very basic image monitor that didn't have a Wi-Fi connection. My husband and I went on our first walk this morning after moving to the country. It's not the kind of country where your nearest neighbor is miles away, but we are surrounded by trees and empty fields. As we got about 35 feet away from the bridge by our house, we noticed a creature standing on the bridge just watching us. It looked like someone dressed in all black just staring us down from the left side of the bridge. We walked closer and realized it was walking away. No matter how fast or slow we walked, it was always the same distance away from us. When we stopped moving, so would the creature. What seemed to change was the shape it would take. As we walked, we could see it hobbling like a drunk person. If we looked away, it would move to the opposite side of the road and be a completely different shape, like a dog or small animal. As we walked onto the bridge, the creature was further ahead by a hill. It began to change shape and had stick-like legs. It would walk but would not bend its knees. It was as if it was on stilts. We slowed our pace and it began to walk over the hill, still changing shape. We got to the hill, looking ahead to see what shape the creature took, but it was gone. No trace of it in the distance, and we can see a few miles ahead at this point. No sign of it being there at all. We believe it was a Skinwalker, and we're glad we never met up with it. This happened about 4 years ago. I just remembered it today and realized I still don't know how to explain it. I worked a swing shift, and it was 11 p.m. to midnight when I got home. My dog was in the backyard. I went inside and took my shoes off right away, getting ready to take a shower. However, my dog started barking frantically. This was common for him as he's very protective. I would check if there was a problem every time just in case. I went out on the deck in the backyard. He was barking at the top of the stairs, facing away from me, which was unusual for him to do. I started talking and he stopped barking immediately. Then I heard a very loud, heavy breathing. I thought it was my dog panting, but he wasn't. The sound seemed to come from above me and he was standing below me. It sounded like someone hyperventilating, like they were trying to breathe as loudly as possible. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Well, I decided to investigate. I went down the stairs and examined my yard and the next door neighbors. This was a suburban area. When I got near where I heard the breathing, I suddenly heard the sound from a yard further away. Once I got to that yard, the sound jumped to the next yard. Being young and dumb, I continued down the street. Every time I got close, the sound would jump. It always sounded the same. It was the same loudness and pitch, always the same distance away. I continued down the road until I reached a bend. My feet hurt, so I stopped for a minute. I realized that due to the curve, I couldn't see the place where I heard the sound, but it seemed to be just within the edges of a wooded area. I was seriously considering chasing after it when it occurred to me how foolish it was to be investigating alone like that, especially without my shoes. My phone was dead. I suddenly felt like I was a prey animal and some kind of predator was trying to lure me further away. I immediately turned and walked back as quickly as possible. Probably it was just anxiety from being alone in the dark, but I couldn't stop thinking that something terrible would have happened if I went any further. I never heard that sound again or had any weird experiences like that. I no longer live in that area. The best mundane answer I have is that it was a bird of some kind. What is most creepy to me is I have since read stories of people following a noise and then had a feeling of something luring them into the woods. I know a lot of these stories are probably either not true or have simple explanations. If anyone has suggestions for what I heard, I would love to hear them. This was in the US in the Midwest. I didn't know this forum existed until recently, but after spending some time here reading similar stories, I've decided to share my humanoid encounter to add it to the record of people who have had these kinds of experiences. As I have not spent much time researching this sort of thing, I don't know how to classify the being I encountered, and I'd appreciate any suggestions as to its identity. I'll tell the story in as much detail as possible for our collective record, but I'll warn you ahead of time, it's relatively mundane and basically begins and ends with me seeing the shadowy figure of a wolf-like entity and going out of my way to avoid it. The encounter occurred on February 2nd, 2016 at around 5 to 8 p.m. in Pullman, Washington. I was living in Pullman, working and completing graduate degrees at Washington State University. I know the exact date because I have a habit of writing bad poetry, and so when some phrase pops into my head that I want to write down, I jot it in the notes on my phone. That day, I wrote, and this is true, I'm afraid to walk alone, afraid I'll meet the devil on the road. Until writing this, I had honestly forgotten about this strange detail of the story, which, in retrospect, is probably the least explainable aspect, as it implies the encounter was somehow more than coincidental. Pullman is a small college town that is extremely walkable. For anyone who may be reading this familiar with the area, I commuted on foot daily from Lamont Street on Military Hill, down the walking/biking path, and up College Hill via Stadium Way to campus. So I would walk down a hill, through a valley on a bike path, and up a well-lit hill into a college campus, taking about 45 minutes. Some other relevant details about Pullman are that it's extremely isolated, surrounded by rolling wheat fields to an extreme degree of deforestation, basically solely populated by local townies and undergraduates. The sun goes down famously early in any season but summer. Drunk undergraduates are common but very uncommon far from College Hill, where the encounter took place. It's not enough of a town to have a homeless population, and drifters are few and far between. To the point, I walked home that evening in the dark, as I had hundreds of times. Upon reaching nearly the base of the street that I lived on, where the bike path would lead up to the nearby road, I saw the form of a humanoid crouched in the path ahead. While the road is somewhat lit, the bike path is down a small berm from the road and is very poorly lit in this spot. From about 60 feet out, I began to feel afraid, as I could not make out much about the form. About 30 to 40 feet from the crouched form, I stopped. I think if the figure was wearing clothing or had human skin of any shade, it would have caught more light. Instead, it looked too large to be human, its back too curved, its head too far forward, and though I saw no evidence of fur, the context suggested to me very heavily that it was fur-covered. My inner dialogue ran through the options and nothing made sense. If it was human, it was a very tall man crouched over as if balling up on the road, back deeply arched over. If it was not, it was humanoid and something people don't generally believe exists. Those are really the only two options. I began to have a fight-or-flight response. I said, "Hey," at a moderate volume, something like 2 or 3 times. The form moved. It looked like it was turning its head toward or away from me. I never saw eyes or any kind of light catch it. It just looked like a hunched-over, crouched humanoid in the middle of a bike path at night. Too large to be a person whose high school didn't try to get them to play basketball. And hey, maybe it was a drunk basketball player half a mile from campus, or maybe not. I was torn between the realization that I was potentially witnessing something fantastic and the will to live beyond the moment. The will to live, or fear I guess, won. I immediately clambered up the embankment to the road, crossed the road, and walked the rest of the way home on the other side. The height difference, darkness, and existence of the berm kept me from seeing the form any further. I walked up the hill to my apartment, locked the door, and reflected on the bad poem line I had jotted down earlier. I wonder if I was being followed by some evil creature and would be further hunted. Nothing else happened, and it became a funny story I told my friends in town. I don't know if this story and its details might be useful to anyone, but I wanted to offer it up. It's a true story, it happened. I have no explanation for it. Even if it was a human, it's a strange coincidence with the note. Maybe the most likely scenario is a stressed out graduate student hallucinated. Don't know. I moved into my new apartment a week ago. My first few nights were comfortable and uneventful. However, about 3 or 4 nights ago, I was laying in bed watching TV when I glanced out of my bedroom door and saw a very tall, about 8 feet, white being walking from the living room and into our kitchen. I've always seen spirits and weird things, but this felt different. I was frozen, literally couldn't move. Eventually, I could talk, and I asked my boyfriend if he could get up and turn on some lights. And I felt fine after that. Nothing else happened that night, and I eventually fell asleep. The next night, I began to see these dark little blobs dashing around. Usually, these are little cat spirits visiting me, and I was fine with it. Until I realized they weren't cats, and they would take on the shape of little people about 3 feet tall. Last night, my 2 cats kept staring in the same direction and following things around the room with their eyes. I got a little freaked out and had this heavy feeling. Eventually, I ignored it and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up to one of my cats being chatty. This is weird because she doesn't usually meow unless someone is talking to her. She's typically quiet. It was like something was playing with her and her toy. I could hear it bouncing around. I felt heavy. It felt like there was static in the air. I looked over into my closet, and there was one of the small people that looked like pure static. I started to say in my head, "This is my home and you're not allowed in it." And suddenly my cat starts howling, absolutely freaking out. I jumped up and go to get her and everything stops. My boyfriend was deep asleep through it all and didn't experience any of it. I don't know what these things are, but they don't feel like spirits. They feel kind of like aliens. My husband and I always walk the dog before bed, from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., and normally it's very dead. It has been raining here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was going to solo walk to the courtyard, but hubby said he would join me to be safe. I walk ahead while he locks the door, and I hear him say, "Hello?" and look back and see nobody, and he just catches up and doesn't say anything more. The dog and I again walk ahead, and he keeps looking behind us. The courtyard to our complex has a huge grass area where the apartments surround it in a U-shape with stairs on the sides. No one is outside, which is odd because normally at 11 p.m. we still see our neighbors, but it's rather chilly. My dog barks and I give him a command to be quiet, and he's looking up at the roof. So I turn around and look up, and something is looking down on me and the dog. I feel like I was watching it for about 3 minutes, but it's hard to explain what it looked like. It was white with hollow eyes and white arms, but they weren't like human arms, and its head was long, like a white dolphin head. My husband says, "I'm not high enough for this shit," and that made me look at him, and when I looked back, it was gone. I assumed it was my mind, or maybe somebody trying to scare us, so I quietly walk to my husband, and he pulls away and is upset, which I assume is because I made him go out in the cold and rain. So I tell him to go inside and I'll let the dog finish. It isn't raining, but you can hear tin roof noises. He shakes his head no, but the dog is kinda scared, so we just head back with my husband and dog ahead, and me behind a bit, and I hear a loud bang on the stairs. Our apartment is along the same hallway, so I get almost to our door and turn around, and I see this thing on the stairs and start walking backwards. I feel very sick and feel my anxiety kicking up an attack, so I just quickly run to our door so I can peek out and see it. And I ask my husband for his phone, but before he gives it to me, I hear a weird voice from the opposite end of the hall from this thing, and I gasped and whipped around to see the tail end of it, which looks like a hairless white deer thing, and my husband just pulls me in and closes the door. He says he got spooked when we first went out and his mind played tricks, and he explained what he thought he saw, saying exactly what I saw. He said he saw it at the end of the hallway where I last saw it, but when we first went out and it leaped away. Then he saw it again when I saw it looking down, which is why he said he wasn't high enough for this. After my panic attack passed, I explained to my husband what I think I saw. I don't know what it was, but it was huge and fast. This is what happened the second time we saw it. Like I said before, we walk mostly before bed each night between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. It depends, and since that last event, things have gotten more active. The tree that's on the edge of the courtyard has super thick foliage, and even in the day you can't see if someone is in it. We were walking around the block like normal, and my husband is playing with the dog, and the dog makes this growling noise. Then I'm hit with 3 or 4 rocks, and I stop and turn to my husband to give him trouble. And from up in the tree, we both hear the same growl he did to the dog. Exactly the same. We just turn around and keep walking, but faster now. We don't acknowledge it beyond that. This was around 10 p.m. Later that night, the dog is really whining super hard to get out. So at about 1 a.m. I cave and tell my husband I'm going very quickly to let him pee in the courtyard, which my husband hates and says he'll be right behind me. So I head out and the dog is super quick and runs ahead. So I allow it and just jog ahead a little. I hear my husband walking behind me as I turn the corner of the courtyard, and I hear him call out "hey" and just keep walking. I see the dog's done, so I turn around and head back around the corner, and I don't see my husband, which is weird because I know I heard him. I head inside and he's asleep on the couch, so I ask if he opened the door and said "hey," and he said he didn't, and someone pounds on the door, and when we open the door, no one's there. Last night, we were both standing outside the door and heard what sounded like someone from the apartment above us jumping up and down. Now at this point, I'm terrified and upset, so I yell "fuck you," and my husband leans over to look up and see if a neighbor is there, and he goes a little white. So I lean over and use my taser, and it makes a massive noise and sparks like hell. The creature runs away towards the courtyard as we run inside. My husband tells me it wasn't the dolphin-headed creature, but something similar. He refuses to allow me to walk alone anymore, and especially not after 10 p.m. Okay, so the only experience I ever had with a creature that I couldn't identify has been on my mind, and a very vivid memory my whole life. After a dream tonight, I think I found out what we encountered. This is what happened. About 8 to 9 years ago when I was younger, me and my friend went to hang out at a park close to his house. No one else was there, only me and him, and this was my first time being there. There was a small pond, a baseball diamond with a fence, a playground, and it was all surrounded by deep woods. We live in eastern United States. We decided it would be fun to get giant branches and draw stuff in the baseball diamond. Afterwards, we would bang the fence around it for like a couple minutes straight, and it was pretty loud from what I can remember. We then heard wind, but not usual wind, but the sound of wind gusting through the forest behind the pond. This was during summer, if I remember correctly, and there was a lot of foliage, so it was hard to see into the woods clearly. We then heard something big, like horse-size big, but running fast through the woods right behind the pond. I saw a big white creature seeming to be about 7 to 8 feet tall and probably weighing at least 300 pounds. It sounded like a horse running, but lighter. It was super fast. I saw it through the pond weeds. It seemed to have fur, but I couldn't see its legs, head, or if it had a tail or not, because there was too many trees and plants in the way. We dropped our sticks and ran to his house, which was in yelling distance. We told his family, but of course they didn't believe us. I haven't talked to him in years and just messaged him today to see if he remembers. As for the dream I had last night, I was buying old rare artifacts and art from this guy. He showed me an opal slate. I picked it up and said, "Hey, this is my birthstone as I'm born in October." I saw what appeared to be a wolf engraved on each side, but he said it was a Wendigo. I took a closer look and it looked like a giant skinny pure white wolf, but with a weird shaped elongated head. Scary looking really, and that was the dream. If you Google Wendigo, you'll see the exact creature I saw in the dream but without the antlers. Like spot on but all white. Was what I saw that day back at the park a Wendigo? Does anyone know anything about this creature or myth/folklore? I didn't see the head or behind as a kid, as I mentioned, so it could have had antlers and a tail. Any thoughts or insights would be amazingly appreciated.